the global South has been oppressed by the IMF. Unfortunately, Venezuela is not going to get anyone that's in America's neighbor is not going to get away. Europe is being sacrificed. UK is being sacrificed. Venezuela, Central America, Latin America, they're being sacrificed. Probably Canada and Mexico. America will be a regional power, and that regional power is controlled by the Proof of Weapons Network because they own all those shares, as I said. And it is cannibalizing its own people at the moment. But with the rise of competing powers, I think the Middle East is going to be, for the first time in 100 years, peaceful. That all of the war that we're seeing right now is completely changing the game in a way we've never seen before. So Middle East is actually going to be sovereign because it's partnered with China and BRICS. I do think for the first time in 1,000 years, Africa might be able to actually use its own resources. It's had 1,000 years of not being able to use its resources. It's just been a playground for corrupt politicians and Western consumption. So there is rising powers. I do think that it is a reset, as it were, and people need to make their decisions. But I have very little faith that the West can do what it's done to the world for so long and not have, problems ahead. And that's why people need Bitcoin in the West.
Yeah, so amen to that. I want to ask, because that was two rather bold predictions you had there, right? That there would be peace in the Middle East. I would love to hear how the calculus used to draw that conclusion, and that perhaps Africa could be its own sovereign power going forward. What is driving these changes? Is this all technological, like with the shift from the unipolar to the multipolar? Like, how is it that, well, if you just focus on those two.
It's all China. It's 100% China. So what happened is when the West got fully controlled by the investment banks and hyper-financialized, many people started buying American assets and European assets. So, these large sovereign wealth funds that had access to their own resources, they never securitized their oil. And so they built massive sovereign wealth. And China built the manufacturing base. And what the Proof of Weapons Network did is it started, if you look at the word BRICS, if you don't know where it came from Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs came up with the idea of BRICS. And the Proof of Weapons Network is invested globally. It's a globalist, if you want to come up with a term. Its members are in the World Economic Forum. They meet at Bilderberg meetings. They're members of United Nations. They have sustainable development goals. They create ESG policies. They're the ones that created the immigration open borders and then closed the borders by installing Trump, and then created the environment where you can have Palantir, the privatized, so Corsiva, GEO, Palantir, these are all the privatized the prison sector that profits from every person that goes into prison, profits from every deportation, and profits from the surveillance state. Those companies together, they're all obviously underneath BlackRock as well. And you have the Peter Thiels and Elon Musks that are able to usher through these different things. But the West is controlled by them. Now, what's happening in the Middle East is obviously the Middle East was colonized by the British Empire, the French Empire, Imperial Soviet Union, and then America just used it as its playground. America needed oil. It's now oil independent. When it invented fracking, it managed to become oil independent. But it needed oil from the Middle East. And it created war after war after war. The whole thing between Iran and Israel. So Israel was a colony of the British Empire. And then when the British Empire handed over its colony to the IMF and the American Empire, and we had this financialized empire that we have today through the IMF and Fed and the proof of weapons network. Israel was there to create a destabilizing force in the region. And then Iran was there in order to create a competing force. And if you read something, there's a book called Operation Gladio by Paul Williams. It explains how there's this strategy of strategic tension where America would fund both sides, or the proof of weapons network would fund both sides. And then if you have two enemies like Iran and Israel, then you can throw the region into war forever. And you can just make sure there's no competing force that can unify around their resources. And so what's happened now is that China came along and said, right, we've got the manufacturing base. We've got a competing economy now. We don't have a Western central bank. We got a state banking system like America used to have. We have no proof of weapons network that sits above the CCP. And we've got, some people estimate 22,000 tons of gold, $3 trillion of reserves, selling its US treasuries, only about 700 billion left, I think. It basically came along and said, right, we need to protect ourselves from selling goods to America. So we're going to create this Belt and Road Initiative and build up everywhere. And so it started investing in Africa and allowing it to compete with the IMF. It started investing in the Middle East. And now China is Saudi Arabia's largest customer. Now, Trump, when he goes to the Middle East, he says, give me trillions of dollars. And so what you're seeing right now is that Saudi Arabia, whose most important customer is China, is buying American assets. And what was the model of the IMF? What was the neo-colonial model? What was the mercantile model? It was use financials in order to control stocks, shares, and resources. And so America sold off all its assets. And the investment bank, the proof of weapons network, BlackRock, where did it set up its office? It set up its next office in Saudi Arabia. It started resetting the world into this multipolar world. I personally believe the tariff policy wasn't Trump's policy. It was Larry Fink's policy. And it was to drive everyone to China and make America a regional technocracy. So button up your regional, you're not controlling over there anymore. And so I think October the 7th was a false flag operation. That operation was to slowly manage the divorce between America and Israel, make it look like that's not happening, but essentially it's vassalized Israel into a toxic asset that now the GCC owns and controls, so that America can slowly retreat, but remain its MAGA narrative that it needs as we enter into this world. Why? Because China sat down with Saudi Arabia and Iran and normalized them. And ever since they normalized, they've stopped backing the resistance movements. America's still telling you that they're backing them. They're not. They retreated a long time ago, started negotiating a nuclear deal. And now the sovereign wealth of UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia is buying the exit of America, saying, we'll buy your assets, but you need to manage a transition out of the region. We want to be our own region now. And the change was China managed to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Saudi Arabia, while enemies, negotiating in sync. And Egypt didn't allow for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And the GCC is now negotiated. And Israel is going to have to become not a colony for creating war for American profits, because Netanyahu works for the US military industrial complex, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic. When you follow the money, it was there for military profits to destroy the region. Now they're going to have to be a normal state under the management of the GCC, and America's going to have to slowly retreat And that's what I think we're witnessing right now. And so there is a controlled operations to manufacture the narrative for how to do this without America looking weak. And Trump will get the Nobel Peace Prize for the Abraham Accords and the peace agreement, but it was China that did it. It was Xi Jinping. But obviously Trump will take credit for it.